Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 3 of the first episode of the Legions Initiative podcast. In this episode, we'll be answering the final questions from the Command Zone 2019 Commander Summit. And specifically, those will be what cards do we think should be banned and unbanned, and also what rules will we change in the format if it were up to us. If you haven't checked out part 1 and part 2 already, I would definitely do that first. A link will be in the description below. And before we get going, I would like to apologize for some of the audio issues that we had. But with that, let's jump into it.
Moving on from that, oh man, I'm excited about this one. Get loose. I gotta like stretch a little before this one. If you could ban or unban any cards, what would they be and why? What is your
Okay.
take on the ban list and the banning situation?
Well, my answer was going to be Paradox Engine.
It's gone.
It's gone. Wishes can be granted. um, Other than that, like honestly, there's nothing local play group that I can't have a sensible discussion about with people. Like, there's nothing that hits the table and I'm like hits. It's like the Grown test when you're playing limited, right? It's like, what's the card you don't want to see? There's nothing where I see it and go, I actually don't want to play this game. Like, there's nothing that I can think of immediately that standing at least at the power level I like to play at, which is between like a 6 and an 8. I think it is interesting because Cyclonic Rift are on the watch list and they're on everyone's tongues and everyone talks about them a lot. And
Right.
to me, Cyclonic Rift to win the game is fine. And I also think in a lot of ways, contextual card. And the thing that for me makes it overpowered is the ability to loop it.
Yeah.
Much rather someone cuts the Archaeomancer out of their deck and keeps the Cyclonic Rift than the other way around.
Right.
Because I can play through one Rift. I'm fine with that. It's horrible, but it's a card.
I can't play.
Through 6? No, I
Yeah.
can't do that. Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
and I think that particularly around that card, I think that the ability to loop and recur things is often more oppressive than a singular card.
Right. And that's my problem with Cyclonic Rift as well, is that it's not necessarily the first Cyclonic Rift. The scenario I'm thinking about is similar, but slightly different in that, okay, now I'm facing 2 blue opponents. I can Teferi's protection that first Cyclonic Rift. I can't
Not
do
the
much about the
second.
second one.
Mm,
You know what I mean? If another player decides to go Cyclonic Rift right after it, well, I guess if you're still phased out, but depending on turn order and things like that. But sure, I can dodge 1, maybe 2 if I've got an eerie interlude, potentially 3 after Ghostway, but like I don't usually run Ghostway all that often. Dodging multiple rifts is hard, and it's such a big tempo blowout. Like, it's such a big advantage to just not lose all of your artifacts back to your hand and all your mana rocks and stuff like that. Like, it's just so crazy how much it does. And when there's multiple of them, especially if they're from the same player, that player is so far ahead.
right, and I think that when it becomes a problem, so I don't dip into like blue green that often because I just don't feel it. It's not for me.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I recently built a blue green deck and I was playing at a table, and the correct line of play for me to take was to Cyclonic Rift, play Eternal Witness, and then do it again the next turn.
Right.
I don't like to be in that seat where the correct line of play is for me to be obnoxious and draw the game out.
Right.
And
Maybe you're
I think that that is one of the problems, right?
right. Yeah. It's so
Because
easy to get that card back and just do it again.
yeah, and why wouldn't you if you just want to win, right? And I think
Right.
that is probably a key factor in any discussion around card bannings and stuff like that. It's like, what do you want to get out of your game of Commander, right?
Right. And I guess your opponents need to run more graveyard room.
I mean, they do actually, to be honest, they
Right.
do.
But I mean, that's a problem that faces a lot of like, if you're expecting a casual game, you're not expecting to get like, you know, blown out by the graveyard. So I get it. Yeah, they probably should run like a scavenger grounds, maybe a Tormod script, something. But like, if you're trying to just build a
But that's
casual deck and then someone's trying to loop Rift on you, then you're like, ugh.
yeah, and it's not just Rift, is it? It's other things that do similar things that drag the game out, and it's that incremental value play, which is great in other forms. I love trying to get incremental value in games of limited. I love trying to do it in different constructed formats, but I think EDH necessarily the play that people love to do that.
Right. Rift isn't really incremental value. Rift is like, for a little while, I was trying to count how much mana was getting bounced by a Rift. And like, it's usually on the order of about 30 to 40 converted mana cost worth of stuff.
Right? Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's how much stuff is getting bounced from your opponents. And that's crazy.
I
I've got
guess I
some,
meant incremental more in the context of the other types of cards you can loop in that same deck. right?
Right. So if you're looping, I don't know, like a Rex Age or something like that, that is definitely
And
more
counter
incremental.
spells and a rift and other
Right.
things.
Yeah.
That's perfectly possible and reasonable. It just doesn't make a quick game. And there are decks, don't get me wrong, there are people that love to play that kind of Magic, and there's tables of people that will just take those decks any day of the week, and they love to play a 4-hour game of incremental advantage. More power
Right.
to you if that's how you like to play. But the more casual to invested player base, and probably a lot of the listeners today don't enjoy those games.
Yeah. So, I'm thinking about what if you ban Cyclonic Rift? What is the next thing that you do? You go to like Cataract Leviathan or Devastation Tide, and those actually bounce the controller stuff as well.
Hmm.
So it becomes really easy to loop that with an Eternal Witness. But at the same time, that player can't get ahead in the same way that they would on a Rift. But
No.
if you've ever seen that loop
Unless
is
they've got impact tremors, you
yeah.
know,
But then they have to
right?
recast
There's
that every
always a
time, and
way.
then yeah. If you've ever seen that loop is miserable. It's
Hmm.
somehow worse than Rift because Rift they eventually just win because you can't do anything and they can. If they're just like Leviathan every turn or Devastation Tide every turn, then the game just comes to a grinding halt.
Right, sure. I mean, there's also the new Flood of Tears card that was in Core 20. That card's cool. It bounces everything for everyone. But lets you put a permanent into play.
Let's take a look. 6 mana, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. If you return 4 or more non-token permanents you control this way, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Ban it. Just ban it.
I mean, the obvious one is like, let's drop an Omniscience. But like, even in
Oh,
limited, right? The
oh God, yeah.
opponent
Ugh.
dropped Saphara Sky's Blade, and I was like, well, on to game two.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, just get rid of that. We don't need that. But more seriously, Cyclonic Rift, here's how good it is. I've heard people say there isn't removal in blue. Cyclonic Rift is so good that people forget about things like the Leviathan, things like Devastation Tide, things like River's Rebuke, things like Evacuation. People forget about those and don't have to play them because Rift is just better than all of them.
right. And you can also go and grab Rift with Spellseeker as well, which is sweet.
Yeah. Like Rift is so good that it makes people forget that other cards exist.
Yeah,
So I'm definitely on board to
people as
ban that
well.
one.
It gets rapid hybridization, right? Pongify,
Yeah, there's and Reality Shift.
most egregious color pie breaks that just wind me up so much.
Oh yeah. Those ones bother me a lot also.
Like,
Um,
ugh.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Blue and green, I feel get to break the color pie quite often.
Aside from the context of what we think about why cards are powerful and what might push them towards banned and unbanned status, what do you think? What do you think? Is there anything outside of Rift that's on your watch list?
Oh yeah. So I talked about this earlier. I am in the minority of people that want to see a really large ban list. I would ban so many things if it were up to me. I would probably add like no joke 20 or 30 cards to the ban list.
Okay.
Uh and if I really wanted to get wild, maybe 50. We won't talk about all of them here, but I'll pose a few. With Iona
Okay.
getting banned today, first up, Void Winnower should go because it's a very similar card, similar feel bad experience. Um,
I can see that.
but some of the more spicy ones that I would get rid of are probably Palancron. Palancron's only use is to be unfair combo. And I get that blue doesn't have a ton of win conditions outside of combo, but Palancron is like way too easy to do it with. I'd get rid of that one. I would probably get rid of like Sylvan Library. Sylvan Library does entirely too much for 2 mana. You
Yeah.
draw cards, you rearrange the top of your library. It's like Divining Top every turn without having to spend the mana to do it. And you can get extra cards when you need it. There's no other card in any color that like operates similarly to the efficiency that Sylvan Library.
Right. It's interesting because this is one of those color pie breaks, right?
Yeah. Well, green is like I looked at this. I believe card draw is like secondary in green. So it's not like a true color pie break, but I mean, it sort of is in just the fact
It's a
that it's like
stretch, right? It's the fact that you
right.
can
It's like
pay the life, right, to draw the card.
right. Green doesn't really do a lot of enchantments for the most part, and like it's a card draw enchantment. So yeah, in that sense, like it is a color pie break. But
Like
yeah,
in some ways, like if you said to me, there's a card that lets you look at the top three, put them back in the order, and pay life to draw them. what colors would it be? I'd be like, it's Demir, right?
Yeah, blue and black, probably.
Right? Maybe green black at a push, but even then, like,
Sure. Yeah.
so yeah,
So
it's
like,
interesting.
yeah, like Sylvan Library does a little bit too much. Another one's more narrow, but in the decks that it's good, it's really, really powerful, is Greater Good.
Oh man, yeah. So
Yeah.
like Sylvan Library, I was kind of like, I get your philosophy on it, but I think it does a lot to help certain decks. Like for instance, my Summit deck, it needs it for card draw. Greater Good, on the other hand, like that's an obscene card.
Right. And so my problem, and it most commonly shows up in Angry Omnath. My problem with it is that like once it's down, you can't really respond to it. Like the things just happen. And in that same vein, if you said that you wanted to get rid of Goblin Bombardment, similar in that sort of way, I wouldn't be sad about it.
You say
Though,
Goblin Bombardment.
yeah. And Greater Good is more of the problem to me. Like I don't care that much about Goblin Bombardment. I mean, I've lost to it enough times, but
Mm.
Greater Good just, kind of creates this loop of drawing a million cards and you can't really respond to it outside of a Crossing Grip, and it causes problems. I know
Yeah,
it's
and
not
at
like
that point, once they've drawn the first lot of cards, they've probably done all they need to.
exactly.
It's interesting you mentioned because, like, I run Goblin Bombardment with the Angel of Reses All the Humans. Angel,
Glory's Rise.
I run that with the Goblin Bombardment and the Fiend Hunter and a Phyrexian Altar in my Summit deck.
Yep.
Because I wanted an alternate win condition that wasn't just combat.
Right.
But I also didn't want to necessarily want to be able to tutor it out and have that be the main plan.
Right.
And
Yeah,
an
it's kind of
interesting segue because I think that tutors do over centralize the format, right?
yep.
I think
Um
whenever we want to talk about banning and unbanning cards, like unconditional tutors are a bit good.
yeah, Vampire Tutor, Demonic Tutor are very, very good. Worldly Tutor, what's the other one? What's the one that puts it right into play, the convoke spell?
Green
Court of
Sun
Calling.
Zenith.
Court of Calling is the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like those are very, very good, and those can enable creature-based combos. But on the other hand, like part of it
They
is,
provide answers, right? On the other
yeah,
hand.
most often it's usually like go find target Craterhoof and win the game with Craterhoof. Which, if someone said they wanted to ban Craterhoof, I would not be upset. It's very powerful. There are other slightly less powerful options, and it's kind of a crutch. It's kind of like, oh well, I need an easy way to win the game. Go to Craterhoof.
Right, sure. I mean, I run Pathbreaker, Ibrex, and Summit, which is basically Craterhoof because it has haste.
Oh yeah, but that's specific to that deck. In every other deck, you have to put boots on it or do something else to.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't give trample. Does it give trample? Ibex.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, does it? Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's Craterhoof in that deck. Good for you.
6 mana as well.
Yeah, very cool.
Very
But
efficient.
but like that's specific to that deck, so I'm fine with it. Where
All right,
Craterhoof is just
and what I will say is that although I'm running that and I'm running when I'm firing off my Eldamri's call, I'm usually going to get a Rex Sage or Anadork or something that will help me draw cards. I'm not
right,
tending to want to just combo out every game.
right. So I have mixed feelings on the green ones because like it is cool in some sense to be able to like build around a specific creature. I love Amaria Shepherd as a card. There's no great way in white to tutor out an Amaria Shepherd. So if you're playing green, you can find it really easily and do cool Amaria Shepherd things.
Oh hell yeah.
Um,
I was playing against an Abzan deck that had the Emiria engine and then it had all the good green and black stuff that can go with that engine and it was oppressive.
Right. But like you talk about unconditional tutors, when you have unconditional tutors or very general tutors, like let's say the blue and the black one, you can actually run less board wipes in your deck because you just have ways to tutor for them when you need them. When I play Boros, if I want like a more Borosy control thing, I'm running like 6 to 7 board wipes probably, where in mono black, I can usually get away with like 4 or 5 because of the tutors.
Right, yeah.
And most people just go for like Toxic Deluge and do that whole thing. When they did the 1 versus 1 ban list on Magic Online about 2 years ago, it was weird not having them. And I definitely agree that some of them are way too good, but it also felt very odd to not have them. Let's say the green deck, let's just say there's like an elf deck at the table and it's just like making a bunch of elves. Unless I'm running like 6, 7, 8 board wipes, I can't guarantee that I'm gonna have one when I need it. So it's tricky. Like it's a
It is
weird place.
tricky. And I think that just the way this discussion has gone just proves that it's a very nuanced issue when discussing about how cards impact a format as big as
Right.
Commander. And
Yeah.
I think that it's such a ripple, it's such a butterfly effect that I don't envy the amount of work and testing that the rules committee obviously have to put into curating this ban list, because talking what, like 10 minutes, and I already feel like we've barely scratched the surface about what we've just
Oh
talked
yeah.
about.
Yeah, we could do like, a whole series on this topic. Yeah, it's a massive issue, and like you said, there's a ripple effect to anything you do is, it's going to have impacts and consequences to other things in the format. Moving on from the tutors, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one because I think it's been talked about a lot, but we'll just go real quick. I'd ban the mana rocks. Most of the first half of our discussion with planeswalkers was like around mana rocks. They cause problems. Real quick, what are your thoughts on those?
I think if we had your ban list, it would be a completely different format.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. My format. Yeah, my format would be so like the thing is I would ban cards not just because they were too powerful, but just because like people use them as a crutch. So like is Crater Hoof too powerful? Nah, it's pretty strong. You can stop it though. But
But my response to that is, how many crutches do we use in Boros because there's nothing else?
oh yeah. Yeah. If
Like it hurts
yeah,
Boros a lot too, right?
yeah, it's gonna hurt everyone. Like, I guess that'd be the issue is that like I don't want to give up anything, but I want like other colors to lose stuff. And obviously people who play those colors want the opposite.
Obviously, that's the Boros part of the color pie. It's fair for everyone, but more fair for us.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Man, I had a whole list of cards that I wanted to ban at one point. I could literally do a whole separate video on that, so we won't go crazy there. But
Okay, not
unbans.
today. Maybe another day.
Unbans. Do you have like one particular unban that you like?
Honestly, no. Like, there's nothing on there that screams at me that I want to brew around it, and missing from the format that is on the ban list.
There's two potential ones for me, and again, we won't spend like a ton of time here, but I would want to see a long trial period on both of these before they were like permanently unbanned, and that would be limited resources and panoptic mirror. Limited resources basically shuts down lands and ramp and green decks. For those that know me, I have this unnatural hatred towards green decks and ramp. And like it's just lands are broken in Commander. Like playing the most lands probably wins you the game, and it's like so taboo to destroy lands. So, limited resources is a really nice option to like Azusa decks or decks that play Azusa and just want to put 10 lands into play on turn 5.
Yeah,
Um,
and I must admit that, like, I think twice recently I've seen a beginner player who likes to play white, jam a limited resources into their deck, not knowing it's banned, and I've had to say reasoning, but it is banned. I'm sorry, and they've just been heartbroken because they're like, "But it answers green so well," and I'm like,
I
"Yes, it
know
does."
it really does. Yeah. So like what you should say to them is, hey, you can only use this if there's a green deck at the table. And then it's okay.
Honestly, compared to some of the other cards, probably not as powerful.
Yeah, no, it's probably not. Again, I'd want to see like a lot of testing and a lot of data on it to really get a feel for it.
So
Because
an interesting thing that I think is that I think it's in a similar place because it is banned, but a Smothering Tithe. I think the decks that want to use it fairly will be punished by decks that want to break it.
yeah,
Because I think that Smothering Tithe from the average deck that wants to play it is just sweet. Decks that will break it, depending on what cards get released, and like the colors that don't need it, essentially the colors that are splashing the white, right?
right. But
They don't need what might cause it to be a little bit like too good in some. It's why it gets shot down when it comes into play. I think it's the
yeah,
same thing with limited resources. There are some decks that don't necessarily need to be doing it that will do silly things with it.
right. And I've actually seen people adjust their play style. I've seen people paying for Smothering Tithe now.
Mm.
I've seen a lot of times it'll get shot right after I cast it, which is unfortunate. It's a lot of mana to sink into something that doesn't do
It
anything.
is. It is.
And but yeah, I've seen people adjust the Smothering Tithe a little bit, but the thing you worry about is 4-color Nekusar deck, just Smothering Tithe and Wheels. And in some amount of games, like I would say probably between like 35 and 40% of my Aurelia games, I'll just hit Smothering Tithe Wheel and the game changes completely. Like I just go wild.
It's magic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it feels like being the other colors where I just get to do unfair things. And
Yeah. But you've
it
worked
feels
for it.
great.
That's the thing. You've worked for
Yeah,
it to get
y-
there. It
yeah.
doesn't happen every game.
Right, and I've waited a very long time for something to feel this good in these colors.
Yeah, I got to do it when I was down at Magic Fest London, and that was when I picked up my first paper Wheel of Fortune, and it felt so good. Oh man, it was great. I won so many games. I was
Oh
just on
yeah,
cloud nine.
yeah. It feels amazing. Anyway, moving on from ban list, we may just have to do a whole separate episode on that because I've got some pretty crazy ideas. Again, I know I'm in the minority. I know a lot of people favor a smaller ban list. I am a bit against people that favor no ban list because the cards on there made their way on there for a reason. Is kind of my general take on it. But
Right, yeah. I think the only thing I'd say to that, like, is that again, like I'm not in favor of anything that requires a lot of decision making from a small group of people.
right, right. It's always
Maybe
like you
says a
want.
lot about my approach to government, but let's not get into that.
Yeah, yeah. This is a non-political podcast.
Yeah, we can cut that out. It's fine.
No, it's fine. Anyways, next question. What do you think about the
Um,
recent chatter to increase the maximum hand size to 10? A few high-profile pros have been advocating for this change in the competitive formats because they feel it punishes players who are slipping on mana, a situation that is already punishing you by putting you behind on tempo. What are your thoughts?
like, where did this discussion take place? I
Yeah.
hadn't heard any of this chatter at all.
Yeah, I hadn't either, which is interesting. Now, a long time ago in Magic Online, you could play 40 life 10 card games of like extended. You could do a custom game.
Mhm.
It no longer allows that, but it was something I messed around in. It's kind of wild. Having 10 cards in your hand is just a very strange feeling. My general thought on this is that if it punishes players who are slipping on mana, that means that they're not running enough mana, at least in Commander. Like I know in 60 card formats, it's a little bit different. Like sometimes you just get mana screwed or mana flooded
Mhm.
because like you don't have ways to generate resources, like you don't have gift of estates in standard, um
Yeah.
to make sure that you hit all your mana. But what I've realized is, and I talked about this earlier, is that people who don't run enough lands will do literally anything to not put more lands in their deck.
Yes, they will literally do anything.
Hmm.
Like it's like
Yeah,
the
they will.
kid. It's like the kid that you ask to tidy the bedroom, and everything goes under the bed. Like it's
Right.
the easy way out. It's the
Yeah.
easy way out,
Right.
right?
So yeah, they will do literally anything, including changing the starting hand size to not put lands in their deck.
Yeah. So this one's interesting because I think the philosophy is probably coming from the same place as the London Mulligan, which is that they want people to have less non-games and
Right.
they want to decrease the variance. Now, it's interesting that this is apparently coming from pro players because I think I've also seen a lot of pro players rail back on that ethos and say that part of what makes Magic such a good game is the whole mini game and thought process that goes into mulliganing and deciding like how to approach a game and a hand.
Right.
Some people were advocating for getting rid of sideboarding in limited, because they were going to introduce the one game queues like on Arena into shops, and I'm like, that just removes a whole part of what makes Magic a deep and interesting game, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So I think that having 10 card hands from that perspective, I think it lowers the skill floor, right?
Yeah.
Lowers the
I think
ceiling a little.
it's like you start with a limited hand. There's limited options in your opening hand. If you start with 10 cards, you're more likely to have, let's say in modern, you're more likely to have that rest in peace. And you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep this hand because it's got rest in peace against dredge deck. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to make tough choices in the same way. Like,
Right.
I've got a 7 card hand, no rest in peace. Do I need to mulligan to 6 just to find it? Or do I keep the 7 because I think it's good enough? If you've got 10 cards, then I think you're removing a lot of that really intricate decision making.
Yeah, and in some respects, the direction that modern is headed, for instance, to use your example, a 10 card hand might fix some of the current problems with the over centralization on the graveyard and some of the decks can be, and if you don't have the answer, then you lose, right? But
if we
we
have
also
10,
have to ask
go ahead.
ourselves, is that where we want to be?
Yeah. Because if you give me a 10 card hand, I am 100% playing red deck win.
Mhm.
Bolt you, bolt you
Or
again,
you
bolt you again, bolt you again. I've got more of these. Let's keep going.
Right. So it's interesting. Like, and I can see the argument more for constructed in some ways than I can for commander.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I
I-
get it. So, when you're watching like the world championships or like the end of a pro tour or something like that, and you see someone mulligan down to like 5 or 6, you're like, "Ooh, that's gotta feel terrible." You're in the finals, like you made it that far and you've got a mulligan because you just didn't draw lands.
Right. And even if it's not the Pro Tours, even if it's just F&M, like the amount of drafts I've got to the final of and then had a non-game because I've had to mulligan to 5,
Yeah.
I feel horrible and it doesn't even matter. Like,
Yeah. You want a format that's really interesting that I did a video on a long time ago? Triple Innistrad Limited, the original Innistrad draft.
Hmm,
That format, great draft format, but is often won on mana screw and color screw. There's not a ton of fixing in that format, and a lot of times a player will just get stuck on lands or not get the colors they need, and they just can't do anything, and then they lose to someone who's just like able to play stuff.
yeah, just someone who's able to curve out.
Right.
Which I guess, yeah, to bring it back to the question, a 10-card hand will let you curve out more often than a 7-card hand.
Yeah. Yeah, it will. But I mean, for me, I think ultimately like the game is just built on 7 cards. Like things are balanced with a 7 card hand in mind.
I agree.
And I think changing that would just be like so much upheaval. You'd have to ban a million things in every format, probably. Like we just talked about, burn decks would be insane with 10 cards. And I guess on the other hand, everyone would have to run life gain to counteract all the burn or counter spells or whatever. But
Mm,
yeah, I think the game is just it's balanced on 7 cards, and 7 cards you get enough, but you still have to make tough decisions about what you're
right.
playing and what you're keeping and what's going in your deck. Where 10 is just like, oh, I get to have everything. Is sort
Also,
of
I guess there's an elephant in the room there as well, which is, so is it the starting hand that's increasing to 10, or is it the hand size as well? It's just the starting hand, then obviously discarding things turn one's pretty strong.
yep,
But if it's
yep,
the hand size in general to 10, then any strategy in which it's nice to be able to pitch a card now and again becomes a lot more difficult.
yeah, that's true. But I mean, you're talking about your unfair decks. It's going to be your reanimators and your dredge and all that stuff.
I mean, sometimes after a wheel in Aurelia, you do want to just discard something, right?
Occasionally,
And if you don't
occasionally that's
have
a
the
thing that
Gaia
happens.
Reach Sanitarium, then sometimes you do want to just ditch something.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. Like play Reliquary Tower. You know what I mean? Like the effect. So sure, there may not be Reliquary Tower in standard all the time, but if you're a modern player, just play Reliquary Tower. There's also the artifact that does it. Was it Spellbook and Library of Lang, depending on your
Mm.
format again. But
But on the flip side, like, be discarding those cards.
yeah. Then
Like, well,
what's that card? Insanity Sire or something like that.
oh my, don't talk to me about
Yeah,
that.
I haven't seen a lot of that card lately on Thursday nights. So
I think got me good. When we played at Magic Fest London, we had a game with the Master of Magic's team, and Seb dropped one, and yeah, that was.
yeah, it completely changes the game.
We were all tired and had a lot of sugar at that point, so it was just hilarious. But like, we'd have just probably been like grown.
Yeah. There's a guy I know that plays it a lot, and he was playing a Lord Windgrace Mass Land Destruction deck, and he got the Sire down. I'm playing Akiri Bruce. Everyone discards their hand. I played a Wheel of Fortune, which is actually really good with Sire of Sanity down because I got to draw 7 and no one else did. And anyway, through a long sequence of events, I got a Jit down, blew up his thing, and eventually won the game. But
Nice,
it took a lot, and it alters the game very dramatically.
really does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, one last question. If you could change one thing regarding the rules of the format, what would it be and why? What would you like to change?
I would like to make it a hard and fast rule that on turn 0 of Commander, you have to have a discussion about your decks and what everyone wants to get out of the game.
That's a good one. I like that.
Because I think that as much as it's something that more experienced players will do, unless you spread more communication about why that communication is good, then you're still going to have a lot of people turned off the format,
Yeah,
games that they might not necessarily have wanted to.
right. And it's like we talked about, everyone wants something different out of Commander.
Yeah. And, you know, there's times when you sit down at a table and, if you don't have the conversation about, are you comboing off? What's your plan? What's the power level? Is it like a 7? Is it an 8? Is it a 9? Like, if you don't have that discussion, and you don't newer players why that's healthy, you can really like not enjoy it enough to just not come back, and that's not what we need for this format. We need the constant influx of new blood because it keeps things fresh, keeps more people buying Magic products, and it keeps the game going, right?
I agree. And one thing I've noticed is asking a number I found to not be very helpful. Everyone just says 7 all the time. I've started asking things like, how quickly can your deck win? Does it have combos? And stuff like that is a little bit more telling than, everyone just answering 7 all the time.
I think
You know,
that's a good point, actually. I think you're right because I've sat down at a table before and there's been a taser player, and I've been like, "How powerful is your taser deck?" And they've gone, "Oh, it's a 7." I'm like, "So you're not going to combo off that quick?" And they're like, "Probably not." I didn't
turn
play the
5
game
combo,
out.
go. Blah.
Yeah, I didn't play the game out the way I should have done. I should have mulliganed differently. And then all
Right.
of a sudden, like I was tapped out and they just won out of nowhere. And like it was important less for me, but also for the other players at the table that were less experienced with how to deal with these kind of decks because
Yeah.
the onus would be on me a little bit to answer it. And I
Right.
didn't, so I felt like I let everyone else down.
Yeah, I know that feeling where you're like, someone else is playing a really strong deck. You have two players that might be newer or playing like a pre-con deck or something. They're not going to have the breadth of answers or the breadth of knowledge to know exactly what they need to shoot and why. And yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on like you as someone who may know that. And it could be circumvented by like just talking it out before the game and saying, "Oh, well, your deck has a combo finish. All right, I'm going to either play differently or grab a different deck because I know you have a combo finish."
Yeah. And that
And
discussion is a group activity, right? Because
right.
the whole table needs to be aware and know like, well, it's not just on one player to answer it. Like,
Right.
but yeah, like, what about you? What do you think? Is there a rule change that you would like to make?
I've actually got a couple. I don't know if I actually filmed these when I did the thing because it was so long ago now. But as I've been thinking about it more over time, a while back I heard of a group that they had a rule where you couldn't drop your mana rocks until turn 3. And leg-
Interesting.
yeah, logistically it's sort of a nightmare to like explain that to people. But like if everyone just agreed that like no soul rings, mana vaults, chrome oxes, etc. before turn 3, then you get a much more balanced gameplay. When you start talking about like planeswalkers out of the command zone, well, if a planeswalker actually comes down on turn 4 like it's supposed to, then it's not nearly as scary. And just a lot of that sort of stuff. You could eliminate a lot of that explosiveness and a lot of that like, oh, this one player is really far ahead and it's super early in the game and no one has the mana for good removal yet. If you just slow down the mana rocks.
That's interesting. So one thing that I think is interesting about that is that politically speaking in a game, like there are a large percentage of games where I just don't do that anyway
Yeah.
because I don't want to be the target coming out of the gates. In some respects, that's because I have a reputation anyway as being someone that sometimes plays aggressive decks and sometimes is the person that wins. Like I can't help that. I'm good at Commander. Like
Right. Yeah.
I have a reputation, but still, like even if that wasn't the case, there is a lot to be said for threat assessment early game. And unless I have like a really really strong line in my opening hand that rewards going ham on those artifacts straight away, I often won't drop them until a little bit later until I can secure that strong line anyway, because there's just too many times where like vault and then someone will just disenchant it and I'm like, oh great, cool. Like
That's
my whole
interesting.
line
Like,
of play is different now. Like
yeah, that's interesting. That rarely happens to me. I rarely drop a mana rock and have it get shot. They'll get blown up in board wipes, like there's no tomorrow. But
mhm.
I rarely have someone like shoot it with cheap artifact removal.
It happens less to, I guess, a mana vault, but more to like my Sword of the Animist or something like that.
Sure.
It's always depending on your hand, right? So there's too many different scenarios to really make a hard and fast rule. But what I was basically trying to say was that it's interesting you bring that as a rule up because there are games anyway where that line of play is correct.
Yeah, you won't always need to drop mana rock the second you draw it. Or I'll hold back mana crypt a bunch if I don't have anything to do with it, just because I don't want to take the life loss if I don't have to. But on the other hand, like a Patreon sent me a deck a while ago, I cast a turn 2 Zakama. Zakama is 9 mana.
Wow.
Yeah. It was
I'm
like, I mean,
speechless.
yeah, it was like a more or less perfect 7, and there was temp with discovery in there. that like opponents took lands with, which they should not have done. But you know what I mean? And let's just say I'm first. I don't remember if I was first in that game or not, but let's say I'm first in the turn order. I've got 9 mana on turn 2, and you played a tap land. You know what I mean? Like, so just giving other players, like, if everyone has like 2 turns to not go wild and just everyone get their lands into play, by the time you get to turn 3 or turn 4 and can explode with your mana, at least by that point, people have some amount of mana for removal. On turn 2, there are not many answers to a Zakama, like
It's
swords
true.
and path, maybe, but
I think that kind of hinges as well on the fact that are people even running the right amount of removal anyway?
uh,
Um,
probably not.
but I also, yeah, probably not, right? But I also think that, I mean, I'm going to disagree with you that I think this is a possible rule change because I think that it comes down more to the play group and the power level of decks. Change in, at least I get the impression from where you're coming from is from a more sort of up perspective to like combat some decks going off too quick, which can just be done by people playing more similar power level decks.
Right. But yes and no. Like, you mean every once in a while you'll even see like a precon. Precons come with Soul Ring in them. A precon deck that just gets lucky and draws its Soul Ring is probably gonna, cause a headache for other players at the table. Even if their decks are relatively strong, even more so if they're playing precons themselves.
Why not just get rid of Soul Ring?
Because then you have to talk about the other mana rocks also. You have to talk about Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Mana Crypt, Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, and a few others. And
They're all like super expensive, right? So it's only going to be like the higher level players that will play them, unless someone started an arms race, which does happen, right? But
Yeah, I'm in an arms race currently, and yeah, so the easy two are Mana Crypt and Soul Ring are probably the easiest ones to get rid of. Mana Vault and Grim Monolith don't bother me quite as much, just because they're kind of a one shot thing. But you get into this large discussion about which ones are too powerful and which ones aren't. But I think it's just easier if you just said, yeah, you can't play them until turn 3. If you want to be explosive on turn 3, at least by that point, everyone's had a chance to get a couple lands in, and they can potentially respond to what you're doing something big on turn 2, that player that's last in the turn order may not be able to respond to it for like 2, 3, or 4 turns.
yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from for sure. I just don't know if that's the answer that I would propose. But fair play.
Sure.
What was your other one?
The other one is kind of like we talked about a little bit, potentially starting 2 types of commander, having competitive commander, and I'd probably lump it where like high power and competitive, and then you have like mid power and casual on the other side, and having 2 separate ban lists for those. I think it's a cool concept. Again, logistical nightmare, but from a pure gameplay perspective of, you want the best gameplay experience, I think it's a really cool thought experiment.
Yeah. Again, I think it's interesting. I think that can be, because of the logistical nightmare, it might be something better placed to be managed by local communities. And I say that realizing that not everyone is lucky enough to have a local community to play with. And I think that's a very important issue because I think that sometimes the privilege of having a good play group and a good group of people to play with means that you don't necessarily see some of these issues, right? You can probably sort this out in your play groups and make it less of a logistical nightmare as a solution to that, which is probably a fine solution. It's not going to work everywhere because not everyone has a consistent play group, not everyone has all that will support them with that. And you do need something to work from, right?
Right. So,
Um,
the turn 3 soul ring thing, like the one group does it. If you go play with another group, then, everyone else may not abide by that rule or may not want to abide by that rule. So,
Yeah, I do. What I want to take away from that, I think, is the distinction between the sort of different power levels that people play at. Things that I was a bit disappointed what didn't get picked up on with my response, and was interpreted as like EDH and competitive EDH, and that was it.
right.
Because I do think there is like that distinction even in outside of competitive EDH. There is strong like real value orientated decks that will either combo out really quick or play a massive attrition game.
Yep.
And then there is regular commander, which is, hey, here's my new commander, it's fun, let's play a game.
Right.
And I do think they are separate. They're different games, they're played in different leagues. They could potentially benefit from different rules.
Yeah. And it's about trying to create a better play experience. So, when I'm playing my casual deck, if the rules are set that like we're in a casual setting and I don't have to worry about certain things, like I know it's gone now, but Paradox Engine was kind of the elephant in the room. It's just a nice thing. Like it's nice that okay, it's well established that we are playing within a certain range of power, and you have to abide by the ban list for that. So anyway, yeah, some interesting suggestions there. Potentially some things you could implement in your own local groups and see how it goes. And let us know if it works. Anyway, moving on from that, kind of wrapping up, anything outside of the world of Magic that you want to talk about?
Outside of the world of Magic.
Yeah.
What? There's a world outside Magic.
No, no.
Don't tell anyone. Like,
What world is this?
yeah, the graphics aren't as good. So I mean, I just got a new job, which is pretty cool.
Very cool. What are you going to be doing?
On Monday, I will be doing software testing and coding for a non-profit company that does a lot of science that aims to replace animal testing with really complex algorithms. It's really cool.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah, they're a great company, really good vision, and they seem like a great bunch of people. So I'm super hyped to start that. Yeah, that's what's happening in my world. Aside from that, I've been playing a lot of Crash Team Racing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you ever play the original?
I have not.
Okay.
What's that on?
It's on PS4 and Xbox One and
Okay.
Switch, I think, as well.
Okay.
It's a remake of an amazing kart racing game with Crash Bandicoot.
Uh,
It's way better than Mario Kart, and if you're gonna
oh,
like
shots
tell me that
fired.
it isn't, like,
Shots fired. I was never huge on Mario Kart, and it's probably just because I never had it. And whenever I play it, people usually just school me because they like know the levels and know all the stuff. But yeah, sounds cool.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. What have you been up to? Anything new?
Uh, I recently finished the new season of Stranger Things.
Oh
Um,
man, me too.
yeah, I'm not crying. I just have something in my eye.
Right. Yeah. I obviously don't want to spoil anything for the listeners, but that was a ride.
It was very interesting. Now, personally, I like the first two seasons just a little bit better, but I still really like the ending, third season.
I agree. And one of the things for me that it always manages to do well is sort of scratch that nostalgia itch and
Oh yeah.
hit the sort of themes and stuff. I mean, I never was alive in the 80s, but I can still appreciate that, like they're hitting a lot of good notes there that I can still appreciate.
Right. I was born in 85, so I caught like, I remember like the tail end of the 80s just a little bit and was young enough in the 90s to see a lot of things from the 80s. So, yeah, it definitely scratches the nostalgia itch and reminds me of being a kid.
Yeah, I think most of my music taste is still back there anyway, so
Yeah, same.
so bad at finding new music. Like I need people to literally force me to listen to things.
I'll send you a few things once we finish up.
Sweet,
Uh
do it.
anyway, we'll wrap it up there. Once again, where can people find you?
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at the Kristen Emily. We can just type that up and have that underneath. I'm currently doing a bit of a giveaway. I won my pre-release and won some cool Ultimate Guard stuff, so I'm going to give away a few things too. So if you want to go and find my tweet and retweet that
Very
as
cool.
well. I write articles over at masterofmagics.com, mostly Commander, but I do dip into draft as well. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Also, I want to say big thanks to you, PJ, for inviting me on here today.
You're very welcome.
It's been great. Really enjoyed it. Definitely
Awesome.
one of my favorite content creators anyway. So it was really sweet to be able to just have a bit more of an extended chat with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate all the kind words, and I'd like to thank you for coming on as well. And with that, I think we'll wrap everything up. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Interestingly, we could probably have this as an outtake, but sure. But
Yeah.
when I went to Magic Fest, we went to a panel with Mark Rosewater,
Okay.
and I got to ask him some questions, which was cool. Next is on the card about Akhan's Run. It's the Lurgoyf, which I can't remember. It was to do with Safi, but it's not Safi, I don't think. Anyway, I digress. But so I asked him a question. I said to him, so after Prince Smothering Tide, how well do you think it's addressed some of the issues that White has in catching up in the format? of Commander. And do you think that card was successful? And do you think you will consider other cards similar? Um, Interesting, because he was like, white does draw, it has all the answers. And I'm like, hmm.
Yep.
I kind of, but at the same time, like that's the all end all statement. Was the approach that it certainly seems to me that taking on that issue. It's the ability to get the cards to do the things rather than being able to do them.
Yeah. So you were talking about Smothering Tithe, correct? So you cut out real
I
quick.
was talking about Smothering Tithe.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. And I had a similar conversation with him on Twitter about white card draw, being able to draw in very white ways. One of the things that I thought about is like, all right, if white's good at making tokens, which it is, you should be able to. There should be a card that allows you to draw based on the number of tokens you have. But yeah, he had that same hardline response of white does not draw. And it's like this format is based on ramp and card draw. Like, as much as I tried to fight the command zone on that issue, it really is true. The way to win a game of Commander is ramp and draw more than
100%. And I think that the Commander product to fix those issues.
right. Like if you do it in a supplemental where you're not going to mess up standard and modern, completely fine with that. Like, is there anything wrong with a white harmonize? No. Like,
So yeah, so